PCN tours the Keystone State, taking you inside Pennsylvania's factories, museums, and historical sites.
Hello, my name's Jeffrey Ray, and I'm Curator of Collections at the Atwater Kent Museum in Philadelphia. And I'm here to welcome you to the museum and to our exhibit, A Legacy for Philadelphia. The exhibit opened about a year ago, and one of the things that we've tried to do in the exhibit is answer questions that visitors have about Philadelphia and the museum. One of the questions that we're asked most often today is, what is an Atwater Kent? And I'm here to tell you that an Atwater Kent is or was a radio. And we are named the Atwater Kent Museum because we were founded by Arthur Atwater Kent, one of the country's leading radio manufacturers. In 1936, our building was vacated by the Franklin Institute, and Mr. Kent bought the building and gave it to the city of Philadelphia with three conditions. One, that it bear his name. Two, that it be dedicated to the history of Philadelphia. And three, that it be free. Mr. Kent founded his company in 1905 in Philadelphia and began by making automobile parts and components. And during the First World War, he got significant government contracts, and after the war was over, he began to branch out into radio. In the early 1920s, he made radio components, and in 1923, he made his first complete radio. His factory was the largest radio factory in the country, and in the early 1930s, he was the largest radio manufacturer in terms of sales. In addition to answering the question, what's an Atwater Kent Museum, we want to focus on our collections and to tell you a bit about the city's history through the things that we have here. One of the things that always surprises people about Philadelphia is to learn that Stetson hats and the boss of the plane was made right here at 4th and Montgomery. This remarkable watercolor of the Stetson factory was given to us by John B. Stetson's great-granddaughter, and it shows the factory at the height of manufacturing in the early part of the 20th century. The large bell tower you see in the factory was the site or the home for the great Stetson factory bell. We have that bell in our collection, and a couple of years ago when we did a program on Stetson, I got calls from people all over the city who wanted to tell me about their experience in working at the factory or living in the neighborhood. And one of the stories I heard most often was how the great Stetson factory bell controlled the lives of the people who lived in the neighborhood and around the factory, because most people worked there. One man told me that when the bell rang at 5 o'clock, every child in the neighborhood stopped playing and went home because they knew their father would be home within 10 or 15 minutes. This is an example here of the hat that Stetson is most famous for. It's called the Boss of the Plains, and it's the standard cowboy hat. And Stetson developed that hat after he traveled to the West after the Civil War. And one of his other most popular hats is the beige one right here, and it's called the Open Road. And many of you will remember seeing it on Harry Truman and Lyndon Johnson, with whom the hat was very, very popular. One thing people don't know about Stetson is that he, in addition to men's hats, he made women's hats. And we have an example here of a hat mold for a woman's hat, and then an example of a Lady Stetson. Stetson began making women's hats in the early 1930s and introduced the Lady Stetson hat line a few years after that. And then one of Stetson's other remarkable innovations at the time, he founded the factory in the late 1860s, was Stetson not only made hats, but he also made the boxes in which the hats were sold. And Stetson also understood that Americans could be snobs, and so he invented a crest, a Stetson crest that he put on his hats, in the hat bands, and on the boxes. It's made up, but the one element that is there is the beaver, and of course the beaver was the source of the felt for his hats. Pennsylvania was founded, as I'm sure you know, by William Penn, one of the leading Quakers of the late 1600s. And this section of the exhibit is devoted to Penn and the influence that the Quakers have on the history of the city of Philadelphia and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. One of the most important things that we have in the collection now is the Great Wampum Belt, that, according to legend and to family history, Penn received from the Lenape Indians at the Treaty Elm in Shackamaxon, or what is now Kensington. The belt is made of oyster shell beads and leather and depicts Penn holding hands with, in a friendly manner, a member of the Lenape tribe. One of the problems with this belt is that there is no record of any treaty happening at the Treaty Elm, and so people have questioned whether the belt is real or the event that it commemorates ever happened. We don't know, and will probably never know if that is the case, but the Great Wampum Belt has become a symbol of William Penn's philosophy of living in peace with the Indians, and today it's one of the most potent symbols of the city and of Pennsylvania. The Treaty Elm that this event took place under is seen in this charming little painting by Xanthus Smith. The elm was located in Kensington, and Smith painted this image of the tree in the 1860s, and it is based on a drawing by a gentleman named J.J. Barrellet, who did a small watercolor of the elm in 1808, 1809. The elm blew down in a great storm on March the 5th in 1810, and it got cut up and was sold by a couple of entrepreneurs, and it's one of the first popular relics of the city. I'm particularly fond of this painting because it shows the goat nibbling at the leaves in the Y of the tree. Another important painting that we have on exhibit is Edward Hicks' painting of the grave of William Penn. And the painting by Hicks shows the grave of Penn near the Friends Meeting House in Jordan's in England, where Penn was buried. And here is Penn's grave, and Hicks shows J.J. Gurney, one of the leading Quaker thinkers of the mid-1800s, visiting the grave with friends. An image that all Philadelphians are familiar with is the great statue of William Penn on top of City Hall Tower. And this is an aluminum maquette or model of the great statue by Alexander Calder that stands on top of City Hall Tower. When this was made at the turn of the century, aluminum was a precious metal, and this was a very expensive and extremely valuable statue. It shows Penn standing with the Charter of Privileges in his left hand and pointing in the direction of the Treaty Elm in the northeastern part of the city. Now, while William Penn is shown there as the benevolent founder of the city, one thing that we like to talk about here is the fact that Pennsylvania, in addition to being a holy experiment and a place where Penn wished to promote the idea of freedom of religion, Pennsylvania was also a real estate venture for him. And this wonderful wrought iron weather vane, dating to 1699, comes from a mill in Chester County that Penn founded or opened along with Samuel Carpenter and Caleb Pusey as a way of promoting settlement outside of the city of Philadelphia and also as a money-making venture. Penn was the sole proprietor, literally the owner of Pennsylvania, and I've always been intrigued by the fact that his initials are much bigger than those of Mr. Carpenter's and Mr. Pusey's, and that also The staff of the weather vane looks remarkably like a scepter, and it says something about the proprietor's role in the colony and how William Penn thought of himself. In addition to thinking about the Quakers and their role in the city of Philadelphia, one of the things that I wanted to do in this exhibit was also to bring out some of the treasures and things in the collection that visitors have said over the years that they like to see. One of those treasures, if you will, is this little dog here, in the case. Her name is Philly. And Philly was the mascot of the 315th Infantry. The 315th Infantry was founded during World War I. It got called Philadelphia's own regiment because all of the enlisted men and over half of the officers were recruited in Philadelphia. They trained in Maryland, and while they were there, a member of the 79th Division found a stray puppy, took her in, and named her Philly. She was smuggled aboard the troop ship. She joined the troops in France, and while she was there, she had a litter of puppies, and also she had a price placed on her head by the commander of the German trenches opposite, because whenever he would try a sneak attack at night, she would bark. She received 2, quote, Bronze Stars, one for being wounded with shrapnel and one for surviving a mustard gas attack. Another thing that has always intrigued visitors to the museum is this lock of George Washington's hair. The lock of hair comes with a note that says, "Hair of the immortal George Washington, presented to me June 11th, 1829 by John Pierce, Esquire, and taken from the general's head in 1779 by Mr. Pierce's father, signed John H. Fury." One of the questions visitors always ask me, is this real? Is this really a lock of George Washington's hair? I don't know, and all we can do now is accept the letter or the note that comes with it and say that, in the opinion of this man and everyone else that's owned it, this is indeed a lock of George Washington's hair. Another piece that has always intrigued visitors and that I'm particularly proud of is this wonderful model of an 8-wheeled Baldwin locomotive. It was made by Dean Benton sometime after 1870 and is an example of one of the finest models made in the late 19th century. It also comes with an interesting story. Just after the Civil War, business in Philadelphia entered into a slight depression. It affected Baldwin locomotives very drastically, and Matthew Baird, who had bought the company from the Baldwin family, went to Europe in search of business. He was in London and was advised by a member of the British government to go to Russia, and he went to Russia and there received a contract to build locomotives for the Russian railroad system. When he returned, the company had laid off over a third of its workers, and with the Russian contracts, Baldwin was able to hire them back. This model was commissioned as a way of saying thank you to Baird, and no one above the level of foreman in the factory was allowed to contribute to it. It was something that the workers wanted to do for Baird to say thank you. And this is the classic 8-wheeled Baldwin steam locomotive that the factory made throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and examples of this type of Baldwin locomotive are still operating in Bolivia and the Philippines. One of those one-of-the-kind things that we have is the sword just above the model of the locomotive. This sword was made by Joseph Richardson, and it is the only American-made presentation sword commissioned by the Continental Congress. Congress commissioned swords in Paris for George Washington's staff. When the swords arrived, there was no sword for Tench Tillman, who had been Washington's aide-de-camp during the Revolution. Someone rushed around the corner, commissioned Joseph Richardson to make a sword, and he did. And it is, as I said, unique because it is the only American-made presentation sword to be commissioned by the Continental Congress. I think that one of the high points in Philadelphia's history, and one that tends to be forgotten, is the American Centennial of 1876. And a section of our exhibit is devoted to that. And the Centennial celebrated the 100th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and it happened here in Fairmount Park. And this is a Centennial stock certificate. The Centennial was paid for almost completely by funds that were raised from the private sector. The United States federal government contributed some money, as did the city of Philadelphia and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but it happened because the Centennial Finance Committee was able to sell stock certificates like this. And the usual stock certificate was sold in the amount of $10. The Centennial opened in May of 1876 and lasted through November of 1876. And it was one of the most successful world fairs that has ever happened. Attendance was not what was hoped for at the beginning of the Centennial, but by the end of the Centennial, word of mouth meant that almost 4 million people, and that is a third of the population of the United States at the time, visited the Centennial. Now, we're sure that some people went more than once, but it still says something for the remarkable success of this operation. And also, remarkably enough, they were closed on Sundays. So they were only open 6 days a week and managed to get that number of people through. The Centennial celebrated not just the foundation of American democracy, but the emergence of Philadelphia and the country onto the vast industrial stage. And one of the great symbols of the Centennial is the great coreless engine that was in the middle of Machinery Hall. This great engine was activated by Ulysses S. Grant and the Emperor of Brazil on the day that the Centennial opened, and it powered all of the machinery in Machinery Hall, and Machinery Hall was the size of 3 football fields. It was made by George Corliss of Providence, Rhode Island, and it was the wonder of its day. The Centennial was also one of the first things to create souvenirs. And the souvenirs are one of the things that survives. Most of the displays and things were dismantled, and unfortunately we don't have examples of them, but the souvenirs, the things that people were invited to buy and take home a piece of the fair, form a part of a large collection that we have from the Centennial. The plates that you see here were made in England, in Staffordshire, and one here, the white plate, shows the art gallery, or what is today known as Memorial Hall, and it's one of the 3 surviving buildings from the Centennial. The other is Ohio House, one of the state houses, and the other is a small cupola. The pink plate shows Philadelphia City Hall. City Hall was begun in 1875 and was supposed to be completed by the time the Centennial opened in 1876. It didn't finally get completed until 1901. And the story of the construction of City Hall is one of those great stories in Philadelphia urban history. It's given the city one of the most remarkable buildings in America, and with sculpture done by Alexander Calder, and it is today being cleaned and restored. Other things that you could buy at the Centennial were this shell necklace that was sold in the Italian section, and also souvenir booklets of photographs and lithographs of the buildings. And This particular building, this photograph or image here shows the Women's Pavilion. The Centennial had the first building dedicated to the accomplishments of women of any of the international expositions. This frame, dedicated to George Washington, is one of the most remarkable assemblages of relics that I personally have ever seen. It was put together in 1862 and 1863 by two brothers living in Germantown, one of them a cabinet maker. They collected bits of wood from every spot within the city and also from around the country. And for example, the heart here that contains a lock of Andrew Jackson's hair, and everything else in the frame comes from a location of great historic significance to these two men living in Germantown. When they made the frame, they also wrote a book, a handwritten manuscript that details where everything came from in the history, and we have transcribed that manuscript, and you can now look at the frame, go through the brothers' notes, and identify where everything comes from. These two remarkable chairs came to the museum just a month before the exhibit opened. I received a call from a woman who said that her grandfather had been a furniture maker in the city and that he had bought these at the Centennial. Now, one of the myths or stories about the Centennial that you hear is that almost every family can claim or does claim that they have a piece of furniture that great-grandmother or great-grandfather bought at the Centennial. I was intrigued by this, and in reading I discovered that that may not be that far-fetched. At the end of the Centennial, when it closed in November, most of the exhibitors didn't want to take their exhibits home, and for 2 months after that, there were a series of auctions. And so it is quite probable that Mrs. Courtney's grandfather bought these chairs, and they correspond in description to chairs that were in the Chinese commissioners' offices within the main hall. They are made of rosewood and mother of pearl with marble seats. One of the things about the Centennial that I've found so intriguing is it produced many, many books, and one of the largest and most colorful is Frank Leslie's Historical Register of the Centennial. And we have it open here to the ceremonies on the opening day where President Grant and Dom Pedro, the Emperor of Brazil, is moving through the main hall and here being greeted by the Egyptian commissioners. One of the most popular exhibits at the Centennial was that put on by Gyllander Glass, or Gyllander because they were Swedish. And this is a case of Gyllander Glass. Gyllander was so popular because he had a working glass house at the Centennial. And there you could commission a souvenir like this glass slipper that you see here. You could stand and watch the craftsman make and mold your slipper. They put it on a cooling shelf with your name on it, and you could then go on and visit other buildings in the Centennial and come back at the end of the day and pick it up. You could see something being made and take it home. Gyllander also created a number of souvenirs, and one of the most popular is this platter called 100 Years Ago. It shows the Liberty Bell, and around the bottom of the platter in the rim are the names of all of the signers of the Declaration of Independence going state by state. A very popular image at the Centennial, you can imagine, was also George Washington. Gyllander also manufactured a pattern of pressed glass. An example here of the pitcher and the goblet, that is called the centennial pattern. One of the companies that gave Philadelphia its great name in manufacturing is that of Henry Diston. And Diston Saw and File became one of the largest manufacturers of steel in the country. And Diston's saws are known for their high quality, and one of the problems that we have in collecting Diston saws is that people still use them. They get them sharpened, they get them reset, and they use them again and again. Diston was an immigrant from Scotland, and he came to this country in the early 1800s, and he had worked in the steel mills in Sheffield, and he began by making saws, and the family legend about him is that he took his saws in a wheelbarrow down Market Street, stopped at the hardware stores, went in, picked a saw off the shelf, took it and bent it double, and if the saw broke, he replaced it with one of his own. And Diston became known for high quality, durable, American-made hardware, and it's a name that made Philadelphia hardware synonymous with quality throughout the nation.
My name is Susan Drynan. I'm the registrar at the Atwater Kent Museum, and I curated the section of textiles that you see going this way. We have a large collection of textiles at the Atwater Kent which have never been seen before, which is one of the main reasons it became part of Legacy. You can see this section is actually connected to the Quaker section. These are Quaker samplers, Quaker clothing. The samplers that you see are two different sort of dates. One 1827 and one is 1797. They show different styles of needlework that little girls would do. The one from 1827 was done by Carolyn Marshall, and she was 11 years old. The clothing that you see, which we're particularly proud of, are Quaker clothing. And people have the idea that Quaker clothing is very somber, very dark. And what you see are a little girl's dress, which was worn in 1871 to a Quaker wedding, all of it hand-stitched. The dress next to it is a wedding dress, a Quaker wedding dress. And you can see that it's not, well, it is a sort of somber color, it's very elegant. This is from about 1850. It has lace on the front, and as you can see where the camera shifts, the color changes. This is a very elegant ensemble that a bride would have worn. The next object you see is also a dress, but this is a little boy's dress. This was worn by Jacob English in the 1870s. At this time, little boys would wear dresses and pantalettes. They often didn't wear pants, regular pants, until they were maybe, 5 or 7 years old, and then they were sort of transformed into little boys with trousers. And this is also a Quaker piece. The objects you see in this case are still Quaker, just to show a variety of the types of things that women would have worn and possibly made. The mitts are knotted in the same fashion that men would knit or knot fishing nets to catch fish, only of course in this sense it's a much finer, much more delicate object. This is a day cap, which is worn inside the house to cover your head. Once women were married, they often didn't show their hair. And it's a particular type of style. In this case, this one is probably about from the 1840s with handmade lace. The little object next to it, further down, is a baby's cap. And this is probably from about 1800. All of it hand embroidered. And you can see next is a bonnet, which was all hand stitched from 1860. and next to it is what we call a calash. This is a type of headgear that a woman wore to cover her bonnet to keep the wind and possibly the rain from it. It's made of hoops that are stitched together, and you pulled forward the top or the front of the calash to keep it more over your head. And this is the same kind of style if you think of a convertible, where it crushes back. And that's how you would normally keep the calash in your closet. If you look up at the wall, you can see a quilt, which is what we call a contained crazy quilt. Normal crazy quilts are a random sort of gathering and stitched together of different patterns and of material, and with no real set arrangement. And it's often done in velvets or silks. This one is from cotton fabric. The fabrics vary in time from probably the early 1800s with very small sort of sprig patterns to much later in the century. We think about 1880. So it's a wide variety of fabrics from over a long period of time. And each square is contained within the blue fabric. And if we move to this side of the room, you can see some more objects that women made as craft. Women during the 19th century, and I'm sure even today, work on crafts. Things that they can sell, things that they can give to family members, things to show off their own dexterity. In this case, this is Berlin work, which is yarn, probably done on a picture that was already created and stamped on this sort of fabric. This is an unfinished piece. And if you look here, you can see some of the beaded work. This is an eyeglass case, and this is a small purse, and behind it, the sort of pink and silver is what they call a pinch purse, where you would put small coins or very small objects and hold it with a finger, basically. A very elegant sort of purse. And if you turn toward this section, we move out of Quaker and into, I suppose you'd call it more high fashion, more elaborate objects. The little girl's dress was made for Mildred Sims by her aunt in 1907. We have a picture upstairs of her wearing a similar dress. This is a very basic style that little girls often wore in 1907. Behind it is a lace tablecloth. This is Battenberg lace, which is strips of fabric, tape almost, which are then stitched together to form an elaborate pattern. In this case, it looks almost like chrysanthemums. The object in front of it is a jacket, which is crocheted, knotted. There's a variety of sewing techniques that were used for this, and this was probably about, we think about 1900, and it was worn by a woman in the evening over a dress or a blouse to sort of make it a little fancier. The dress next to it is a young girl's dress from about 1850. And as you can see, this is probably a Sunday dress, an afternoon fancy dress. It has fringe, it's made of taffeta. It's very lovely, and it's all hand-stitched. The coverlet that you see above us is an overshot coverlet. It was made by what is called a jacquard loom. Jacquard looms were the first computers. You used a punched card, a series of punched cards sewn together, which had a pattern punched in them. They were put into a loom, and you were able to actually manufacture the same type of coverlet over and over again because you could use the same cards. In this case, this was made for Mary Dubois in 1833. And this is a fabric that was used many times over by many weavers, but it's still a very beautiful, elaborate piece of work. And I think we'll be going on now to Johanna Wharton, who will be showing you Norman Rockwell.
On the second floor of the Atwater Kent Museum, we have on display cover story Norman Rockwell's America. Before I began my tour of the second floor, many people asked me, what does the Norman Rockwell's covers have to do with Philadelphia's history? Did he paint here in Philadelphia? Did he live here in Philadelphia? Well, actually, what the connection is, the Saturday Evening Post was published here in Philadelphia, actually right down the street at the Kurdish Publishing Center, and that's his connection to Philadelphia. Norman Rockwell was born February 3rd in 1894 in New York City. Although he may depict many, many images of country life in his paintings, he was actually a city boy. Norman Rockwell loved to draw. Even as a young child, his father used to read him the Charles Dickens novels, and he used to illustrate the characters. He was never very much an athletic child, so when he discovered that he could draw, he really felt special about himself and that he could do something really original. He was not very much of a scholar either. He dropped out of school in 10th grade and went right to the art academy. He was so successful as an artist, by the time he was 19 years old, he was an illustrator for Boy's Life magazine. Feeling pretty good and confident about himself, his friends dared him to try to do a cover for the Saturday Evening Post. Of course, here he is 22. He feels really good about himself. He said, sure, I can do it, no problem. So what he did is he had a box specially made with 2 of his oil paintings. We have the box over here. This is supposed to depict the box in which he came to Philadelphia with the oil paintings. Now, by the time he got to Philadelphia, he wasn't as tough as he was around his friends. He was too nervous to even make an appointment with the editor of the Saturday Evening Post. He just sat in the waiting room all day long. By the end of the day, the assistant to the editor came over to him and said, son, what do you have here in your box? And he said, my name is Norman Rockwell. I have these oil paintings which I have done, and I would like to use them in the Saturday Evening Post. The editor took them out, and then he gave him $75 each for his 2 oil paintings, which was a lot of money in 1916. The first oil painting which we have displayed here on the wall. This is a cover of the 1916 print, The Baby Carriage. What's extremely interesting to note about this is that all 3 models are in fact the same small boy. There's young Billy Payne. Although his oil painting may have contained many colors, when it came time for publishing, the only colors in which he could publish in were red, white, and black. This, of course, this cover here is very sharply contrasted with the work we have next to it. This is a lithograph of the problem we all live with. It depicts 6-year-old Rudy Bridges integrating a New Orleans elementary school in the 1960s. The Saturday Evening Post would not let Norman Rockwell depict such social issues. But after he left the Saturday Evening Post in the 1960s, he began working for Look magazine, and they encouraged him to show real issues of the day. By the 1960s, people were very interested in learning about current events. One of Norman Rockwell's favorite subjects to depict in his illustrations were children. He loved to depict the adventures that children would go on. He himself wished he would have been able to grow up in the country instead of New York City. He idealized the country life, believing that the children that grew up in the country had the real adventures. This is an adventure that he might have gone on as a child during the summertime, when his family went to the country for a month or 2. Although children may have been one of his favorite subjects to illustrate, they weren't always the easiest models. Here are 2 of his favorite models. This is young Chuck Marsh here, and his neighbor, Mary Wallen, on the other side, right here. Getting children to sit still while he had them pose was extremely difficult. The way he got around this is that he had a stack of nickels, and every 25 minutes the child would sit still. He would take 5 of the nickels and put them into their pile. This was so much more effective than promising them 50 cents at the end of the hour or giving them a bill of some sort. And coins were much easier for them because they could actually see their piles grow. For some of the smaller children, he even used pennies so it would turn into a larger and larger pile for them. Besides having the neighborhood kids serve as models, he also used his own children. Here is his son, Peter, in the Girl Playing Marbles cover. And here's Peter as well, being afraid on the high dive. They actually set up a small plank to serve as a diving board so that Peter could model for this. And the fear was real. Peter was actually quite afraid that it might topple over. So he didn't have to act too hard to get the fearful look in his face. Norman Rockwell had 3 sons to the second of his 3 wives. Okay. Norman Rockwell used many ideas that he got in books. He used many things that he remembered as a child or heard about from other children or watching things that his sons did. Another place in which he got inspiration was that of other artists. Rembrandt was his favorite painter. But in these illustrations, we see the work of other painters. Here we have Michelangelo's Isaiah from the Sistine Chapel in Italy. Rockwell took the idea of Isaiah's body and his form and replicated it with one of his most popular covers, Rosie the Riveter. And to top it off, he just used the head of a local woman. I think one of his most impressive techniques that he used was that using Jan van Eyck's oil painting, The Arfanini Marriage. What's incredible about this is the amount of detail involved. Even on the back wall, there is a mirror, and in that mirror, you can see the reflection of the couple's back. Norman Rockwell took that idea in his cover, The Runaway. In the stools, you can see the reflection of the front of the store. That took an incredible amount of effort because besides creating the image in which you have here of the countertop, he also had to create a front of the store in order to have the reflection in the stools. On the other side, we have more images in which he got his work. You can see here, we have a replica of the buildings. Later on in his career, Norman Rockwell would look at this oil painting of the family walking to church and think that he should have spent more time focusing on the families because the detail of the actual buildings is so incredible and the family doesn't look that spectacular. Norman Rockwell was quite a perfectionist. His second wife, Mary, used to complain constantly that he just would continue working on a painting, and never feel that all the detail was done. And at the top, left-hand corner of the 4 ideas, you can see where he got some ideas for the man's face. During the Second World War, President Roosevelt gave a fireside chat explaining why we were fighting this war. He explained that we were fighting this war so that we would have freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from fear, and freedom from want. Norman Rockwell was so inspired by this that he painted 4 paintings representing our president's reasons for fighting. With the persuasion of his wife, Mary, he took the paintings to the Pentagon and asked how they could help the war effort. The Pentagon said that, no, we don't really think these can help. So then he went to his publisher at the Saturday Evening Post, and he said, I have these 4 wonderful oil paintings. How can I use them to help the war effort? So what they did with these 4 paintings, they took them on tour across America, and people would spend a little bit of money to actually see a real Norman Rockwell oil painting in person. By the 1940s, Norman Rockwell was quite a celebrity. In total, they raised $312 million for the war effort. So his idea definitely paid off. Many people view Norman Rockwell as quite a conservative painter. But instead of trying to show the Americans' conservative side, we can look at one of his most famous oil paintings, Saving Grace here. And instead of being about trying to preserve the old ways, I think this is about tolerance. Although we only see 6 of the people's faces and 4 only completely, this is really about the toleration of people. And I think Rockwell tried to depict that, especially later on in his work. The Saturday Evening Post would not let him show what was really going on the war front. He was not allowed to depict images of people dying, families mourning, or real battlefield scenes. So instead of depicting that, he depicted young Private Willie Gillis, and many of his covers during the Second World War show what was actually happening to Willie Gillis. This made families feel a lot safer about sending their sons off to war. We can see that everyone in Willie's family had fought in a war. We can see that Willie still gets the hometown news, so it's not too scary. He really hasn't lost his connection with his family. Willie has 2 women feeding him. Back at home, Willie has 2 girlfriends, actually, that have just found out about each other. Willie gets care packages from home. After the war, Willie's okay. He gets to go to college. To make young GIs feel even better about going off to war, we see that on New Year's Eve, Willie's girlfriend is sound asleep. She's not out with another guy. She is asleep thinking about her Willie. Actually, I watched a special about the girl that posed for this, and since her address was written down here at the bottom, she received letters all over the country from young GIs. Although Rockwell was such a perfectionist, he did make a mistake now and then. When I give tours, I love to point this cover out right here and see if they can figure out the mistake that he made. I usually get guesses along the lines of it being something historical, something to do with the dog is quite popular. But actually, the man in the white apron has 3 legs. He has his hand on his knee while another leg is straight. Don't know if you can see that. Of course, if his hand's on his knee, the back of that leg should be bent, but it's not. So it actually has the effect that he has 3 legs. Norman Rockwell left that mistake in, and that one was not on purpose. The mistakes that were on purpose were shown in his April Fool's Day covers, which he used during the Second World War to boost morale. These covers were full of mistakes, and inside the magazine, they had all the mistakes listed. So when you got your Saturday Evening Post, you would try to write down as many mistakes as possible that you could find. And then inside the magazine, you could check them off to make sure you saw all of them. This one is quite humorous, from 1945. Here's one done slightly after the war. Here's another one that he did that we have on display as well from 1943. This corner here we have set up is one of his studios. It wasn't until 1937 that he really switched over to having photographs instead of actual props. You can see back there in the corner we have a replica of the bar stools and a variety of other things. Here on the easel we have the development of a Rockwell post cover. He would get us an idea and draw parts of it. We can see he started with the man, the dog, one of the women, and then he could incorporate them all into the cover. We can see we have a small copy of how he wanted to do it, and you can see how it then gradually becomes the cover that it does. Many of the props that he used were unfortunately lost in the 1943 fire in his Arlington, Vermont studio. Norman Rockwell was so popular that he was asked to do many illustrations. Even before his career with the Saturday Evening Post, before they had television, or they needed some type of illustration to sell their idea. Here we have on this side an ad that he did for Coca-Cola. And we can see it was also represented in one of his post covers. We have this huge mural here on the wall. And that's a replica of one of his covers of a man working on a mural. I have had many people look at this and asked if we're in the process of making this painting, but no, it's exactly at the same spot in which he stopped in the post cover. Thank you so much for joining us here today at the Atwater Kent Museum. We were so happy to be able to take you around. On behalf of everyone at the museum, we invite you to stop by yourself and be able to tour the museum firsthand. We're open every day of the week except Tuesday from 10 to 5. And we're located right here in the heart of Philadelphia's Center City at 7th and Market Street. Thank you so much again for stopping.
In 1995, we visited Harley-Davidson in York to see how they made their motorcycles.
Okay, here the gentlemen are mounting your tires on your spoke wheels and also your mag wheels.
More than 350 tours later, we're still showing you how things are made in Pennsylvania. PCN celebrates 25 years only on cable. Now you and your family can discover how some of Pennsylvania's most recognized products are made without ever leaving your favorite armchair. PCN Tours is the first book published by the Pennsylvania Cable Network. Modeled after PCN's long-running program featuring manufacturing plants and landmarks, the book highlights 28 of the most requested tours and includes pictures along with the words of the tour guide. As a bonus, the book includes contact information for hundreds of locations featured on the television program. It's a chance to celebrate Pennsylvania's successes and learn about the production process from raw materials to finished products. Makes a great gift for family, friends, or even yourself. To get your own copy of the PCN Tours book, call toll-free 1-866-PCN-8433. The price includes shipping and state sales tax. That's 1-866-PCN-8433. You can also buy it from the PCN store on our website at PCNTV.com. PCN Tours, celebrating Pennsylvania. VHS and DVD copies of PCN programming are now available for purchase online. Visit the PCN store on our website at PCNTV.com and browse through the library of hundreds of program offerings. Tours, books, profiles, Gettysburg walks to World War II interviews, PIAA sports championships, and PCN merchandise. It's all just a click away. PCN offers a safe, secure shopping environment, so don't miss out. Visit the PCN store at PCNTV.com today and get started on building your own personal PCN library.
The Pennsylvania Cable Network's daily program schedule is available by email. To take advantage of this free service, send your email address to pcntv@pcntv.com. In celebration of Pennsylvania culture, PCN devotes overnight hours to Deutsche Welle programming, offering viewers world news and information from Cologne, Germany. International newscasts from Deutsche Welle alternate in German and English every hour. Programs are shown live on PCN from 2 a.m. until 6 o'clock in the morning. Additional Deutsche Welle scheduling information is available through Pennsylvania Cable Network's website at pcntv.com.